The Three Books. In the solitude of Isaac Pendleton's library, the quiet was only disturbed by the soft rustling of pages and the occasional crackle of an oil lamp. The library, with its high shelves and dusty volumes, was Isaac's sanctuary. He had spent years perfecting his craft as a rare book authenticator, his life dedicated to the preservation and understanding of ancient texts. The silence that surrounded him was both a comfort and a cage, isolating him from the world outside and the fears that lurked in his own mind. One late autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the library, Isaac's solitude was broken by a letter that slid under his door. The envelope was weathered, its edges worn, and its wax seal broken. Isaac's curiosity piqued. He picked it up and examined the ornate script that adorned the front. The letter inside was written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. It spoke of 3 ancient books of immense power, each capable of summoning a being that could grant any wish. The client's identity was concealed, and the letter's tone was both urgent and cryptic. The final line of the letter sent a chill down Isaac's spine. "Beware the shadows that follow." The words seemed to echo in the dim light of his study, and Isaac's gaze shifted uneasily to the shadows that danced along the walls. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, stretching and contorting into sinister shapes. Isaac's initial skepticism was overshadowed by a mounting sense of dread. The warning about the shadows unsettled him, and he felt an oppressive weight pressing down on him, as if the very darkness of his surroundings was alive. Despite his apprehension, Isaac's curiosity proved stronger than his fear. The promise of uncovering such powerful artifacts was too compelling to ignore. He meticulously prepared for his journey, gathering supplies and researching potential locations. As he packed his belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in his library seemed to grow darker and more menacing, their presence a constant reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. The days leading up to his departure were marked by restless nights and creeping paranoia. Isaac found it increasingly difficult to sleep, his mind plagued by dark thoughts and unsettling dreams. Each creak of the house and every flicker of the lamp became a source of anxiety. The shadows seemed to follow him, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. Isaac knew he was venturing into unknown and potentially perilous territory, but he was driven by an insatiable curiosity and a growing sense of dread. With a final, uneasy glance at the encroaching darkness, Isaac set out on his journey. The library, once a haven of scholarly peace, now seemed to harbor a lingering malevolence. The shadows seemed to watch him as he departed, their presence a haunting reminder of the warnings in the letter. Isaac's journey had begun, and the path ahead promised to be fraught with danger and dark revelations. Isaac's journey to Egypt was arduous, marked by a relentless battle against the elements. The Adir Desert, with its scorching heat and unrelenting sun, was a landscape of isolation and desolation. Each step through the shifting sands felt like an assault on his senses, and the oppressive heat drained him of his strength. His guide, Khalid, was a grizzled Bedouin with an air of stoic competence, but his eyes betrayed a wariness that Isaac couldn't ignore. By nightfall, the desert transformed into a realm of chilling cold. The temperature plummeted, and the once harsh landscape became a frozen expanse of darkness. Isaac's tent, a flimsy barrier against the elements, offered little comfort. The wind howled through the desert, carrying with it an eerie, mournful sound that seemed to amplify his growing sense of dread. The shadows outside his tent appeared to writhe and twist, their shapes dark and sinister. The tomb they sought lay buried beneath a massive sand dune, its entrance partially obscured by centuries of shifting sands. Khalid led the way with a practiced ease, but Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The tomb's entrance was a crumbling archway, its surface etched with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. As they descended into the darkness, Isaac's flashlight revealed walls covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to shift and change under his gaze. At the center of the tomb lay the Codex Obscura, a tome of immense power and ancient knowledge. Its cover was adorned with forbidden symbols that seemed to glow with an inner light. As Isaac examined the codex, a cold draft swept through the chamber, and the shadows on the walls began to writhe and twist. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in around him. and Isaac felt an invisible presence, as if the very tomb was alive and watching him. The codex was authentic, but Isaac's departure from the tomb was marred by a horrifying sight. Shadowy figures began to materialize from the sand, their forms indistinct but menacing. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent fire, and their presence filled Isaac with a paralyzing fear. He stumbled back to his camp, the shadows following him with an unsettling persistence. The desert, once a place of ancient secrets, now seemed to harbor a dark and relentless threat. Isaac's night was fraught with terror. The shadowy figures seemed to be everywhere, their presence a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. He lay awake, his mind racing with paranoia and fear. The shadows outside his tent seemed to whisper and writhe, and Isaac's anxiety grew with each passing moment. Oh, the Codex Obscura had been secured, but the true horror was only beginning to unfold. Isaac's quest for the second book, the Grimoire of Shadows, took him to the icy peaks of Tibet. The journey was fraught with danger, from treacherous avalanches to the bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. The monastery, perched precariously on a cliff, was an isolated sanctuary, its towering spires reaching into the sky like dark fingers. Upon arrival, Isaac was met with suspicion and hostility from the monks. They spoke in hushed tones, warning him of the grimoire's cursed nature and imploring him to leave. Their eyes were haunted, and their warnings seemed to carry an unspoken fear. Despite their pleas, Isaac pressed on, driven by a combination of scholarly curiosity and a growing sense of paranoia. The hidden chamber where the grimoire was kept was a place of profound darkness. The walls were lined with ancient carvings depicting scenes of ritualistic horror, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of malevolence. The Grimoire of Shadows lay on an altar, its pages whispering in a language of darkness. The chamber was cold, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in on Isaac as he approached the book. As Isaac touched the grimoire, the temperature in the chamber dropped sharply. Shadows began to writhe and twist, coalescing into grotesque, nightmarish forms. The air was filled with an almost tangible sense of dread, and Isaac felt an overwhelming presence, as if the darkness itself was alive and malevolent. The walls seemed to close in on him, and ghostly apparitions emerged from the shadows, their faces contorted in eternal agony. The grimoire was genuine, but Isaac's escape was fraught with terror. The shadows reached out with spectral fingers, and Isaac was forced to fight his way through the darkened corridors. The darkness seemed to close in around him, and the stench of decay and sulfur filled the air. Isaac barely managed to escape, stumbling through the freezing corridors as the shadows clawed at him with relentless ferocity. The journey back to his temporary lodgings was a harrowing experience. The night was filled with the echoes of his own terror, the shadows of the monastery following him with an oppressive persistence. Isaac's paranoia grew with each step, and he could no longer distinguish reality from the dark horrors that plagued his mind. The Grimoire of Shadows had been secured, but the true extent of its curse was only beginning to reveal itself. The final leg of Isaac's journey took him to the crumbling ruins of a castle in Eastern Europe. The castle, a relic of a bygone era, was a labyrinth of decay and darkness. Its walls were covered in moss and grime, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. The castle seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, each creak of the floorboards and gust of wind adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The interior of the castle was a maze of shadow and ruin. The corridors twisted and turned, and the darkness seemed almost sentient, as if it were watching Isaac's every move. His paranoia reached new heights as he navigated the labyrinthine passages. The shadows grew more oppressive with each step, and the castle's layout seemed to shift, disorienting him further. The dungeon where the lexicon of the abyss was hidden was a chamber of unspeakable horror. The book lay at the center of a ritualistic circle, surrounded by flickering candles that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The lexicon's cover was adorned with grotesque symbols and dark illustrations of demonic entities. The chamber was filled with an oppressive heat, and the shadows seemed to come alive with a malevolent force. As Isaac approached the lexicon, the darkness became almost tangible. Shadows twisted into nightmarish forms, and the air was filled with a cacophony of whispers and screams. Isaac felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the very darkness was trying to consume him. The lexicon's pages seemed to writhe with a dark energy, and Isaac fought his way through the darkened corridors, the shadows lashing out with a ravenous hunger. The castle's corridors became a nightmarish maze as Isaac fought to escape. The darkness seemed to close in around him, and the shadows pursued him with relentless fury. The stench of decay and sulfur filled the air, and Isaac's struggle to escape was marked by a desperate race against the encroaching darkness. The lexicon of the abyss was secured, but the true horror of his quest was only beginning to unfold. With the 3 books finally in his possession, Isaac returned to his library, his mind frayed by the horrors he had encountered. The library, once a place of scholarly refuge, had become a den of darkness. The client, shrouded in a hooded cloak, awaited him in a remote, candle-lit room. The atmosphere was charged with an oppressive energy, and Isaac felt an overwhelming sense of foreboding. The ritual began with an unsettling calm. The client chanted from the books, his voice a harsh whisper against the backdrop of an encroaching darkness. The shadows in the room seemed to grow denser, swirling around them like a living entity. Isaac watched in terror as the dark being began to materialize, a creature of unimaginable power, its form shifting and pulsating with a malevolent energy. The being's roar was deafening, shaking the very foundations of the library. The air became thick with the stench of brimstone, and the shadows coalesced into grotesque forms. Demons emerged from the darkness, their bodies covered in dripping, jagged wounds. Their eyes burned with a cruel, otherworldly fire. The client's laughter was a harsh, triumphant sound as he commanded the demons to rise and bring chaos to the world. Isaac's heart pounded as the library became a chaotic battleground. The demons rampaged through the shelves, tearing apart the precious books and scattering their remains. Shadows lashed out with a ravenous hunger, and the very air seemed to crackle with a dark energy. Isaac knew he had to escape. With every ounce of strength, he fled into the night, the demons' roars echoing in his ears. The outside world was a scene of apocalyptic devastation. The once familiar landscape was now a battleground of chaos and destruction. The sky was filled with smoke and fire, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of burning debris. Isaac's journey had led him to the brink of a world consumed by darkness, and he could only watch in horror as the chaos unfolded. Isaac's escape from the library marked the beginning of a descent into a world plunged into chaos. The cities he had once known were now battlegrounds, their streets filled with the sounds of destruction and despair. The sky, once blue and clear, was now a canvas of smoke and fire, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of decay. The demons' rampage was brutal and unrelenting. Cities were reduced to ashes, and the proud monuments of civilization crumbled under the weight of the demonic onslaught. The ground was littered with debris and the remnants of lives once lived. The sky was a churning mass of storm clouds, occasionally illuminated by flashes of lightning that cast the world in a hellish light. Isaac took refuge in abandoned buildings and isolated locations, but no place seemed safe. The shadows followed him relentlessly, their presence a constant reminder of the horrors he had unleashed. His paranoia grew with each passing day, and he could no longer distinguish reality from the nightmares that plagued his mind. The shadow people, with their cold, glowing eyes, seemed to mock his every step. The world outside was a place of unending despair. The air was filled with the screams of the damned, and the earth trembled with the force of demonic destruction. Isaac wandered through the ruins, a broken man haunted by the knowledge of his role in the apocalypse. The shadows seemed to close in on him, their whispers a constant reminder of his failure. In his final days, Isaac was consumed by a sense of hopelessness. The once hopeful scholar had become a shell of his former self, wandering through a world that had been plunged into darkness. The shadows followed him with a relentless persistence, their presence a constant reminder of the horrors he had unleashed. Isaac's final moments were marked by a profound sense of despair and isolation, a fitting end to a journey marked by darkness and chaos.